Welcome, friend, to History Lullaby. Tonight, we drift softly into the world of the Roman Empire, a civilization where economics, power, and human lives were entangled in a system so casually brutal it would make any modern HR department look saintly. Here, life and law danced a careful, deadly rhythm, and the line between privilege and peril was thinner than the silk tunics of senators. Before we dive in, if these stories bring you a little quiet delight, go ahead and subscribe. And tell me where you're listening from in the comments. I love seeing the little map of voices from bustling cities to quiet towns, all gathered here in the soft hush of curiosity. Now, dim the lights, let a gentle hum fill the room, and sink into the story with me. Imagine the streets of Rome, the chatter of traders, the clang of armor, and the invisible currents of politics and ambition shaping every life. This is a world of wealth, danger, and spectacle. A civilization that could lift you to glory or cast you down without warning. Settle in. Listen closely. The empire awaits. If you ever felt overwhelmed by modern job hunting, just be thankful you weren't up for literal sale at the Roman slave market. Because back in ancient Rome, your resume wasn't printed on paper. It was hung around your neck like a price tag. And yes, your defects were listed too. Bites when angry. Won't stop quoting Homer. Thinks he's above dishwashing. All fair game. The Roman slave market was, to put it delicately, a chaotic meat parade. You find yourself standing in the heart of Rome, or Delos, or Ephesus. It hardly matters which, for the stage is always the same. The marketplace is alive with noise. Not the cheerful bustle of free trade, but the deeper, harsher rhythm of human bodies being bought and sold. It is here, among the stone columns and crowded squares, that the Roman Empire reveals one of its truest faces, the slave market. For all the grandeur of marble temples and triumphal arches, it is this, the auction block, that oils the gears of Roman life. The smell hits you first, a mixture of sweat, oil, dust, and fear. Men and women stand in pens, corralled like livestock, their eyes darting between potential buyers, auctioneers, and the heavens above that offer no reprieve. Some are war captives, dragged across continents, their languages foreign, their memories of home still fresh enough to sting. Others are children born into slavery, their eyes already dulled by familiarity with chains. All are here for one reason, to be transformed from people into property, assigned a price as easily as one might assign the cost of bread or a jug of wine. The auctioneer's voice rises above the murmur of the crowd. He stands on a wooden platform, whip in hand, not for use but for emphasis, each crack against the air punctuating his words. A slave is hauled forward, pushed onto the block, stripped if the buyer demands it. Nudity is not shameful here, it is an advertisement. The body is merchandise, and merchandise must be inspected. Muscles are prodded, teeth examined, scars noted, and defects announced. Blind in one eye, the auctioneer calls, but strong in the back. No training, but young and obedient. Each word chips away at humanity, shaping a person into a list of sellable traits. Prices are shouted, arms raised, sesterces promised. The noise swells and dips like the tide. The fate of a life turning on who in the crowd feels like paying a little more for labor, beauty, or skill. Sometimes it is brisk, a few quick bids and a hammer strike. Other times it drags, the auctioneer cajoling, reminding buyers of the bargains to be found in this captive stock. You notice the categories emerge quickly. The able-bodied laborers are the foundation. Men with calloused hands, women with broad shoulders, children with small nimble fingers. They are destined for the fields, the kitchens, the endless work of keeping Roman households and estates functioning. Their value lies in muscle, obedience, and endurance. They are not expensive, not compared to others, but they are necessary, and necessity drives demand. Then come the skilled professionals. Teachers, scribes, musicians, physicians, artisans, captives of wars against Greece or the East. Men and women who once lived with dignity and now find themselves presented like luxury goods. Their talents are paraded before the crowd. A philosopher asked to recite a few lines, a musician commanded to pluck a tune, a doctor questioned about herbs and wounds. These are not bodies to be broken in the fields. These are minds and skills to be displayed in villas, proof that their owners can afford refinement. Their prices climb higher, their futures perhaps softer, though still bound by chains. And always, there are those selected for appearance. Beauty becomes its own currency, more valuable than muscle, more dangerous than skill. Young men with strong jaws, young women with clear skin and symmetrical features, auctioneers oil their bodies, dye their hair, pluck away imperfections, presenting them like statues come to life. They are praised not for strength or intellect but for allure, destined for concubinage, entertainment, or simply as living ornaments in the homes of the wealthy. Buyers lean forward, eyes narrowing, calculating not just price but pleasure. The treatment of the slaves before the sale is almost grotesquely careful. They are oiled so their muscles shine in the sun, hiding malnourishment beneath a sheen of health. Their hair is trimmed, their skin sometimes rubbed with dyes to mask blemishes or bruises. Defects are listed openly, yet concealed with practiced showmanship. A limp is reframed as minor, a scar as evidence of bravery, a gaunt frame as a sign of youth yet to grow. The auctioneer is both salesman and illusionist, turning misery into marketability. You might think the cruelty would be subtle, hidden behind civility, but Rome makes no such effort. The casual brutality is on full display. Buyers discuss men and women as they would cattle, debating whether a strong back is worth more than a quick wit, whether a pale complexion will hold up under the sun, whether a child is better trained for errands or for amusement. They poke, prod, and inspect with the entitlement of ownership before the purchase is even made. Delos is particularly infamous. The island becomes a hub of this trade. Ships docking with cargoes of humans, the markets overflowing with bodies. Here, thousands might be sold in a single day. War captives turned into merchandise almost immediately after conquest. The sheer scale dulls the senses. One man's despair vanishes into the crowd of hundreds, each scream or sob drowned by the auctioneer's cry for higher bids. In Ephesus, the marketplace spreads beneath marble colonnades, the grandeur of architecture standing in grotesque contrast to the reality of what is being sold. Rome itself is no different. Markets bustle with commerce, and within that commerce, people stand as goods among goods. The juxtaposition is jarring, but never questioned. For Romans, slavery is not an anomaly, but a foundation. To question the market would be to question Rome itself. The buyers range from humble citizens seeking a domestic helper to wealthy elites acquiring entire households. Senators and merchants rub shoulders with shopkeepers, each searching for a bargain suited to their means. A farmer might purchase one laborer to help with fields. A matron might buy a young girl to serve in her household. A wealthy noble might buy a dozen, stocking his villa with cooks, scribes, and concubines, each filling a role in the theater of his prestige. For the slaves, the outcomes vary, but never by choice. Some are purchased and sent to grueling lives in the mines or fields, where survival is measured in years, sometimes months. Others find themselves in kitchens, nurseries, or classrooms, their work demanding but less immediately lethal. The luckiest, if such a word can be used, are those whose skills or beauty earn them a place in households where survival chances lengthen. Though freedom still remains a distant dream, the market is efficient, bureaucratic even. Records are kept, receipts written, taxes collected. Each sale is another cog in Rome's machine, another life folded into the empire's insatiable appetite for labor. The casualness is perhaps the most chilling part. For Romans, this is not a moral dilemma. It is an ordinary transaction. The same marketplace that sells olives, cloth, and pottery sells human beings, and no one sees contradiction in that. Standing there, you realize the slave market is not peripheral, it is central. It is the quiet, brutal heartbeat of Rome. Every villa, every field, every aqueduct, every feast, every gladiatorial spectacle, all depend on the lives bought and sold here. The grandeur of Rome is built on the backs of these auctions, the wealth of its citizens, extracted from the despair of those stripped and displayed on wooden blocks. And so you watch as another body is hauled forward, oiled and trembling, eyes wide, as the auctioneer lists their attributes. The bids begin again, sesterces shouted, voices rising, the hammer falls. A life is sold, and then the next, and the next, and the next. The crowd does not pause. The market does not falter. Rome thrives. And the cost is counted not in coins, but in the quiet, broken humanity of those who never had a choice. The noise of the marketplace is not just the sound of voices and footsteps, but of numbers, prices shouted, scribbled on tablets, muttered in negotiation. Rome has an extraordinary gift for turning the mess of human life into calculation, and nowhere is that clearer than in the slave market. Here, bodies are not only displayed, they are appraised, valued, and converted into sums of sesterces. Humanity becomes arithmetic. For the unskilled laborer, the most common purchase you are looking at, somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 sesterces. Put another way, about 2 years of a soldier's wages. To the average Roman, this is not pocket change. It is an investment, a commitment, a bet that the body standing on the block will survive long enough to return the value you poured into them. These are the people destined for fields, kitchens, workshops, the broad base of Rome's labor pyramid. They fetch prices high enough to sting but low enough to make their purchase widespread. If you own land, you likely own slaves. If you are wealthy, you own many. But the number is never fixed. Age reshapes it instantly. A child might cost as little as 500 sesterces, a price so low it encourages households to buy young, to mold obedience into the bone before adolescence hardens it. The child is cheaper not because they are less useful, but because they are a longer gamble. Will they live through fever? Will they survive training? Will they grow into strong laborers or waste away in the smoke of the kitchens? The risk is priced in, like the uncertainty of a crop before harvest. At the other end, the elderly fall in value just as sharply. A slave with gray hair, stooped back, or missing teeth might cost almost nothing. They are sold at discount, sometimes as part of a bulk lot, bundled with stronger bodies the way a grocer might toss in bruised fruit. Their years of labor are already spent. They are liabilities more than assets. Buyers hesitate, calculating the cost of keeping an old body fed against the meager labor it can still provide. Many end up in the harshest work, the mines, the mills wrung for whatever remnants of strength remain before they collapse. Health carved prices apart. A body free of scars, with bright eyes, steady limbs, and strong teeth, can fetch far more than one limping, wheezing, or blemished. Auctioneers shout out defects openly, both by law and by practice. Prone to fever, one might say. Deaf in one ear. Scarred on the leg. The defects lower the price. Though sometimes buyers see opportunity in desperation, cheaper slaves can still dig ditches, haul loads, or suffer in places no one else wants to work. Rome has no shortage of uses for the discounted body. Appearance plays its own cruel role. Pale skin, symmetrical features, tall stature, these add to the price, even if the buyer has no intention of using the slave for sexual service. Beauty is valued in Rome, a kind of status symbol that reflects on the owner as much as the enslaved. A handsome servant in a villa whispers of refinement and wealth. A beautiful concubine in a household announces taste as loudly as a mosaic floor or imported marble. The auctioneer knows this, and oil, dye, and grooming transform bodies into desirable commodities, disguising the bruises of war with the sheen of market polish. But skills are where prices soar. An unskilled laborer may cost 2,000 sesterces, but a trained physician, a philosopher, a musician with a reputation, these could command 10 times as much, sometimes more. Education is expensive even in freedom. In slavery, it becomes priceless. Wealthy Romans parade their educated slaves as living trophies, proof not only of their money but of their sophistication. A Greek tutor instructing your children, a doctor attending your household, a poet reciting at your banquet. These were not just conveniences, they were performances of cultural dominance. The slave's skill was not their own. It became a mirror reflecting glory onto their master. And yet, skills are double-edged. A talented slave carries a higher risk of resistance. A philosopher may sneer at his master's ignorance. A doctor may withhold a cure. A musician may refuse to perform. Buyers know this, and prices sometimes dip for those whose pride remains too obvious. Talent is desirable, but only when leashed. Auctioneers reassure buyers that arrogance has been beaten out. that obedience is assured, that peculiarities or privileges will keep them loyal. Even value must be managed. The market is not static. War reshapes everything. Each conquest floods Rome with new bodies. Gauls, Spaniards, Greeks, Jews, Africans, dragged in chains from the edges of the empire. When war is fresh and captives are abundant, prices fall. A glut of human stock drives costs down, and suddenly even modest households can afford new labor. But abundance carries its own risks. War captives are more likely to resist, more likely to remember freedom bitterly, more likely to rebel. Spartacus himself was once such a man, and the shadow of revolt always lingers. Buyers know this, and the discount reflects not only abundance but danger. During peacetime, when the flow of captives slows, prices climb again. The supply shrinks, and suddenly each body on the block costs more. Merchants thrive in this fluctuation, buying cheap in times of conquest, selling dear in times of calm. It is commerce, pure and simple, though the commodities are breathing, weeping, whispering in languages no Roman can understand. The arithmetic of pricing grows dizzying in its detail. A strong young man from Thrace, scarred from battle, but still powerful, perhaps 1,800 sesterces. A Greek tutor, polished and eloquent, 10,000 or more. A nursemaid, fertile and calm, with children, 3,000. A beautiful girl, hair oiled and skin pale, her price climbs not because of her labor, but because of the lust in the eyes of the buyers. A gladiator, trained and scarred but victorious, astronomical sums, measured not in thousands but in the chance of spectacle and profit. The marketplace thrives on these calculations, these endless adjustments of value. The auctioneer does not see people. He sees columns of numbers, risks and rewards, supply and demand. Buyers do the same. They glance at bodies the way farmers glance at fields, wondering what yield they will produce, what profit they will return. Humanity becomes invisible under the weight of sesterces. And yet, even in this cold arithmetic, cracks remain. A mother weeps as her child is sold beside her, and though the price is low, the grief is high. A man refuses to answer questions, and though his price drops, his dignity lingers. A buyer hesitates, not because the cost is too high, but because the eyes staring back at him remind him uncomfortably of his own son. The market does not allow for morality, but morality sometimes haunts its corners. Still, the numbers dominate. Rome thrives because it has mastered the art of turning people into profit. Fields are plowed, villas staffed, roads built, aqueducts raised, all by bodies purchased at calculated prices. The empire's greatness, measured in marble and conquest, rests on ledgers filled with the cost of human lives. And in those ledgers, the worth of a person is never who they are, but what they can do, how they look, how long they might last. So you stand again in the marketplace, watching the bids rise and fall. 1,000, 500, 2,000, 10,000. Numbers shouted into the air, hammers struck, receipts written. Each transaction is smooth, efficient, and practiced. Each life is reduced to a sum. And when the auctioneer calls for the next body, the cycle begins again. Rome's economy grinding forward on the relentless mathematics of human suffering. The Roman marketplace does not only trade in muscle, it trades in minds, in beauty, in refinement. For all the empire's reliance on backbreaking labor, its true elite reveal themselves not by the number of fields they control or the oxen they own, but by the sophistication of the slaves they parade. Rome's power is not only built on brute force, it is staged in salons, in villas, in marble atriums where philosophy is quoted over wine and music drifts across mosaic floors. The slaves who provide these moments are not commodities of necessity but of prestige, proof that wealth can purchase not only survival but culture. You see them paraded in the same markets as the field hands, but the difference is clear. Where laborers are oiled to show their strength, these men and women are groomed to show refinement. A Greek tutor stands with his chin lifted, robes adjusted carefully, eyes sharp with education. A musician plucks at a lyre to demonstrate skill, the notes rising above the din of the crowd. A physician is questioned on anatomy and herbs, rattling off knowledge while buyers murmur at the promise of health imported with the purchase. These slaves are not shouted over like cattle. They are displayed like treasures. Philosophers fetch some of the highest sums. Greece, long conquered, still commands reverence for its culture, and Greek philosophers in Roman households become badges of sophistication. A wealthy Roman does not simply host banquets, he hosts debates, with his purchased philosopher sparring against guests in displays of wit and wisdom. The philosopher's arguments are not his own, his victories reflect glory onto his master. To own philosophy is to own civilization itself, and Rome revels in the irony of conquest. The Greek who once looked down on barbarians now stands as property, teaching his captor's sons the very culture his people once prized. Tutors follow a similar path. Children of the elite are raised not only to command, but to appear learned, and a Greek tutor provides that veneer of education. Latin might rule law and politics, but Greek remains the language of art and intellect, and a Greek in your household ensures your children speak with refinement. The tutor's value lies not only in instruction, but in status. A Roman who boasts of Greek tutors boasts of wealth, worldliness, and superiority over neighbors. A tutor is an ornament of the mind, hung upon the family for others to admire. Musicians are prized in a different way. Music at a banquet signals leisure, refinement, and control. To command entertainment at will, to have a lyre plucked or a flute played in your atrium, is to demonstrate power over not only people, but the atmosphere itself. These slaves are trained, disciplined, and displayed, their talent a performance of mastery by proxy. They are not free artists expressing themselves. They are instruments wielded by their owners, their notes a reflection of wealth, their melodies a chorus of status. Physicians, meanwhile, are paradoxes. Purchased to heal, they often live healthier lives than the field hands, yet their freedom remains chained. A Roman master boasts not only of his household's survival but of his personal doctor's skill, a mark of luxury as much as practicality. These slaves are sometimes granted peculiar respect, trusted with lives even as they are denied their own. Their value lies in the tension between necessity and prestige, their presence turning illness into an opportunity for their master to demonstrate wealth. And then there are the women. The marketplace for female slaves is saturated with expectations that go beyond labor. Beauty is commodified ruthlessly, displayed with oiled skin, painted lips, carefully chosen garments. Buyers are not subtle in their inspection. They comment on complexion, on symmetry, on the curve of the body. A beautiful woman is never sold as merely a domestic servant. She is marketed as entertainment, as concubine, as living ornament. Her value lies not in what she does, but in what she represents: pleasure, prestige, possession. The entertainment markets swell with women trained to dance, sing, or play instruments, their performances rehearsed for the moment of sale. They bow, they spin, they smile with practiced grace, each gesture designed to extract higher bids. Concubinage is an open secret, woven into every transaction, though rarely stated outright. Buyers know, sellers know, slaves know. The silence is a thin veil, one everyone agrees to pretend exists. A woman's body becomes both workplace and display, valued not for strength or skill, but for the eyes it attracts, the whispers it inspires, the status it confers upon the man who owns her. The cruelty of this commodification lies not only in the sale, but in the expectation. A laborer is valued for toil, a musician for skill, a tutor for knowledge, but a concubine is valued for performance of desirability itself. A life reduced to endless rehearsals of beauty. Oils hide blemishes, dyes adjust hair, clothing is chosen to flatter, smiles are trained into faces. The woman is transformed into a symbol, her individuality erased by the need to embody allure on command. She is not herself, she is a reflection of the man who owns her, and her price climbs higher the more convincingly she can embody his wealth. All of these categories, philosopher, tutor, musician, physician, concubine, exist not to fill needs, but to fill egos. They are the luxury goods of human commerce, purchased not because they are required, but because they are desirable. To own them is to declare superiority, To display them is to flaunt dominance. The more expensive the purchase, the greater the prestige. For Rome is a society that equates worth with acquisition. The slave's skill, beauty, or intellect is not their own. It is swallowed into the identity of the master, paraded as proof of wealth. The economic value of these slaves is staggering. Records show sales reaching tens of thousands of sesterces for the most talented individuals, sums that dwarf the cost of ordinary laborers. The price is justified not only by the skill itself, but by the status it confers. A wealthy senator who hosts a banquet with musicians, dancers, and philosophers at hand does not simply entertain his guests. He dominates them, reminding them of his reach, his wealth, his ability to command the talents of others as though they were amphorae of wine or statues of marble. And yet the irony remains. The brilliance of Greek culture, the beauty of music, the healing touch of medicine, all purchased, displayed, and chained. Rome revels in its ability to consume the sophistication of others, to transform conquered people into living trophies. Every note played, every lesson taught, every poem recited is a reminder of conquest disguised as refinement. You watch as another auction unfolds. A Greek philosopher argues with the auctioneer, refusing to recite lines, his silence lowering the bids. A tutor demonstrates his knowledge, reciting Homer, until the crowd murmurs approval. A woman dances, her movements graceful but mechanical, her smile brittle beneath the oil on her face. The bids rise, the hammer falls, the cycle repeats. Rome's appetite for prestige is endless, and the marketplace feeds it relentlessly. The luxury of slavery is not survival. They are spectacular. They are symbols of a world where wealth is measured not only in fields plowed, but in minds and bodies owned. Rome does not merely conquer land. It conquers culture, beauty, knowledge, and turns them all into property. And as you leave the marketplace, the echo of music, the shimmer of oil on skin, the murmur of Greek words sold for Latin coins, all remind you that Rome's grandeur is built not only on force, but on the commodification of everything that makes life meaningful. The Roman world prided itself on categories. There were citizens and non-citizens, patricians and plebeians, free men and slaves. But within slavery itself, the categories fractured even further. Each body slotted into a role, a purpose, a price. Some were strong backs meant for fields, others skilled minds meant for classrooms, others still purchased for beauty, music, or pleasure. And then there were those set apart entirely, the specialized slaves crafted by cruelty into something rare, something that carried a price tag heavier than gold. You notice them in whispers before you see them in the markets. The eunuchs, the castrated men whose altered bodies make them desirable to Rome's elites for reasons both practical and perverse. They are not common. Castration is dangerous, often fatal, and so survivors are rare. That rarity alone inflates their value, like precious gems mined from human suffering. Buyers speak of them with the detachment of collectors, docile, trustworthy, incapable of threatening the purity of women in a household. But underneath the cool arithmetic, there is fascination, even fetish. Eunuchs are often placed in the innermost chambers of wealth and power. They serve noble women, guard the rooms of the imperial family, or manage delicate household tasks where trust is paramount. Their altered bodies make them safe, or so Romans convince themselves. No jealous husband fears them. No scandal can attach itself to their service. They become shadows, ever present in the background of aristocratic life, pouring wine, arranging garments, whispering advice. Their very existence proof of the lengths Rome will go to turn people into instruments. Their value lies not only in obedience, but in refinement. Eunuchs are expected to embody delicacy, soft-spoken, precise, unthreatening. They are groomed to move with elegance, to handle fabrics, jewels, perfumes. Some become attendants to empresses, brushing hair, arranging robes, managing schedules. Others act as stewards of estates, trusted with accounts, because their loyalty is assumed to be purer, less corrupted by desires of lineage or legacy. The Romans, practical in their brutality, see advantage in cutting away the possibilities of inheritance along with manhood. Temple service, too, becomes a destination for these specialized slaves. In some cults, especially those with Eastern origins filtering into Rome, eunuchs are considered closer to the divine halfway between male and female, set apart from ordinary society, existing in a liminal state that feels sacred. They serve in rituals, tend to shrines, and embody the mystery of devotion. Rome tolerates these practices, even adopts them, because they add color and spectacle to the empire's tapestry of religion. The eunuch in a temple is not merely a servant but a symbol, his body transformed into a living ritual. In the imperial courts, eunuchs become powerful precisely because they are trusted. Close to empresses, concubines, and children, they act as gatekeepers to the inner chambers of palaces. A senator may command legions, but a eunuch can control who speaks to the empress, who enters the nursery, who whispers in the ear of a child destined for the throne. This proximity to power makes them paradoxical figures, enslaved, altered, yet influential in ways that terrify and intrigue free men. The empire's gossip mills churn with stories of eunuchs shaping imperial whims, steering decisions, and pulling strings invisible to the Senate. Their rarity pushes their price beyond most buyers' reach. While an ordinary laborer might cost 2,000 sesterces, a eunuch could command sums 10 times higher, sometimes more. Their value is not tied to physical strength but to exclusivity, to the prestige of owning what few can afford. To boast of eunuch attendance is to declare that you live at the very edge of Roman luxury, indulging in the human equivalent of rare silks or imported spices. They are trophies of cruelty, status symbols carved from flesh. But specialized slaves are not only eunuchs. Rome has endless niches, endless appetites, and slavery provides bodies to fill them all. In temples, household-born slaves are trained from childhood to assist in rituals, carrying incense, preparing sacrifices, and sweeping sacred courtyards. Their loyalty is assured by the intertwining of faith and servitude, their lives spent serving gods and masters simultaneously. They are less expensive than eunuchs, but their value lies in continuity, in the quiet assurance that the household's devotion is maintained by hands trained since infancy. In administrative roles, specialized slaves become clerks, accountants, secretaries. Their literacy is rare, their education carefully cultivated. Some are entrusted with managing estates, balancing books, handling correspondence. They live in a strange paradox, more educated than many free Romans, yet legally property, their signatures binding contracts even though they themselves cannot own their own names. Masters flaunt their literate slaves like finely tuned instruments, reminders that wealth can bend not only muscle but intellect into service. Theatrical slaves, too, occupy a peculiar category. Trained to act, sing, or perform, they become the centerpieces of private banquets, their talents entertaining guests long after the food has gone cold. Their value lies in spectacle, in the ability to transform an evening into memory. Some perform in troupes, others as solo curiosities. Their prices fluctuate wildly, depending on skill and novelty, but the allure of commanding entertainment at will ensures they remain prized possessions. The cruelty of specialization lies in its precision. Rome does not merely enslave bodies. It reshapes them, molds them, and categorizes them into uses as exact as tools. A eunuch for the inner chambers, a literate clerk for the accounts, a temple servant for the rituals, a performer for the banquets. Each life slotted neatly into function, their individuality stripped away until only role remains. The marketplace reflects this ruthlessness. Auctioneers shout not only about strength or beauty but about specialization. Castrated, trustworthy, fit for noble households, educated, literate, skilled in accounts, performer, singer, guaranteed to delight. The human soul becomes a sales pitch. And yet, within this machinery, whispers of humanity persist. A eunuch brushing the hair of his mistress hums softly, the tune reminding him of a childhood cut away with his manhood. A clerk pauses over a letter, writing words he himself might have spoken had freedom been his. A temple servant lights incense with trembling hands, wondering if the gods see him as devout or as trapped. Specialization strips them of choice, but it does not extinguish the quiet persistence of being human. The paradox of Rome is laid bare in these slaves. The empire that boasts of law, order, and civilization, builds its refinement on mutilation, its elegance on brutality, its prestige on the suffering of those it calls rare. The eunuch in the palace, the clerk with the stylus, the dancer with the practiced smile, all are monuments to Rome's ability to turn cruelty into luxury. Their high prices reflect not their worth as people, but the depth of the empire's appetite for control. So you watch as the auctioneer gestures to a pale young man, his voice carrying above the crowd. Castrated, obedient, refined, fit for the chambers of the wealthy. Bids rise quickly, not for the man himself, but for the idea of exclusivity he represents. The hammer falls. Another life is sold into a specialty, another body turned into a symbol, and Rome continues, its markets bustling, its villas gleaming, its temples fragrant with incense, all sustained by the delicate, brutal calculus of specialized slavery. The Roman Empire, for all its chaos, prided itself on order. Roads ran straight, aqueducts delivered water with mathematical precision, and laws were carved in bronze for all to see. Even in slavery, the rawest form of human ownership, Rome wrapped its brutality in layers of bureaucracy. A body was not simply bought and sold. It was documented, taxed, and regulated. The empire that conquered half the known world also invented paperwork for the sale of souls. In the marketplace, the most familiar transaction was the public auction. Here, the process was loud, theatrical, and unmistakable. Slaves were herded into the square, displayed on platforms or blocks, their attributes announced, their defects proclaimed. Buyers gathered, voices rang out, coins clinked, and contracts were struck. It was a spectacle as much as commerce, a performance of Rome's dominance over the conquered. The public nature of it served a purpose. Visibility discouraged fraud. Everyone could see the body being sold, hear the auctioneer's claims, and witness the price shouted into the air. Transparency, though harsh, reassured buyers that they were getting what they paid for. But not all sales belonged to the noise of the forum. The wealthy and discreet preferred private transactions. Behind closed doors, away from gawking crowds, sellers displayed their most prized human wares: a gifted Greek philosopher, a skilled physician, a singer whose voice melted banquets into silence. These sales were hushed affairs, more negotiation than performance. The price agreed in whispers rather than cries. Here, reputations mattered, introductions counted, and the transaction was wrapped in a veneer of civility that did nothing to soften its cruelty. The slave was no less property, but the process was cloaked in the polish of exclusivity. For the highest echelons, there were sales so discreet they left almost no public trace. Senators and emperors acquired slaves not in markets or even private chambers, but through networks of brokers, go-betweens, and gifts. A friend might offer a prized singer. A political ally might present a skilled scribe. Coins still changed hands, but through indirect channels, masked as generosity. These transactions carried prestige precisely because they were hidden, because not just anyone could access them. It was one more way Rome turned people into markers of status, not only who you owned, but how you acquired them. Yet whether public or private, noisy or discreet, Rome wrapped every sale in documentation. No slave was sold without a titulus, a written description hung around their neck or carried alongside them, detailing their attributes. This was the Roman equivalent of a product label. It listed name, origin, skills, age, and often defects. 20 years old, born in Gaul, literate in Greek, prone to fever. Buyers read these with the scrutiny of men inspecting ledgers, weighing strengths against flaws. The titulus served as both advertisement and protection, for if a seller concealed a defect, the buyer could later sue. Once the sale was complete, the buyer received a tabula, a waxed tablet functioning as a receipt. On it was recorded the date, the names of seller and buyer, the details of the slave, and the price paid. It was signed, witnessed, and sealed, transforming a human life into an entry in Rome's endless record books. The tabula was proof of ownership, protection against disputes, and yet another way the empire ensured that even in slavery, order was maintained. Rome feared rebellion, but it feared chaos more. Paperwork was its way of binding both people and power. taxes wrapped around the process, like ivy around stone. Every sale carried a centesima rerum venalium, a sales tax of 1%. It might seem small, but in a city where thousands of slaves changed hands, the revenue was immense. Rome ensured that every auction fed not only masters, but the state itself. The empire's appetite was insatiable. Conquest brought captives, but their sale brought coins for the treasury. Even the suffering of the enslaved was not wasted. It was monetized twice, once in the purchase, once in the tax. And then there was the manumission tax, the fee imposed when a master freed a slave. Rome was pragmatic enough to allow freedom, but never without cost. To grant liberty, you paid 5% of the slave's value to the state. Freedom itself became taxable, a final reminder that Rome controlled not only chains but their removal. The empire profited from bondage and profited again from release, a cruel symmetry of bureaucracy. The legal framework was intricate, woven to prevent fraud but also to reinforce control. If a buyer discovered hidden defects, say, epilepsy concealed, or a tendency toward disobedience unmentioned, they could return the slave within a set period, demanding refund or compensation. It was commerce, after all, and Rome demanded honesty in its cruelty. The law did not protect the slave, only the buyer. But even this structure reveals how deeply commodification had seeped into Roman life. Bodies were treated with the same expectations as amphorae of wine or herds of cattle, accurately described, fairly priced, properly documented. You might imagine all this formality softened the brutality, but in truth it sharpened it. The paperwork, the receipts, the taxes, the lawsuits, they stripped away any remaining illusion of humanity. A slave was not even allowed to be sold as a mystery. Every feature was itemized, every flaw recorded, every transaction taxed. The body became not just property but bureaucracy, folded into ledgers, preserved in wax, overseen by clerks. Even dignity was denied, replaced with documentation. Yet in its own way, this system reveals Rome's genius. The empire was vast, diverse, filled with competing languages, cultures, and peoples. To control it required not just force, but systems, and slavery was no exception. Auctions were regulated, receipts enforced, taxes collected, disputes adjudicated. No matter how far you were from the Senate, if you bought a slave, you engaged with Roman law. The empire turned cruelty into governance, and governance into profit. The spectacle of the public auction might shock you most, the nudity, the cries, the hammer falling. But in truth, the more chilling element is the quiet efficiency of the records. Somewhere in a Roman villa, a wax tablet lies on a shelf, inscribed with the purchase of a girl sold at 15, her name carved into letters that outlast her life. Somewhere in the treasury, a coin glints that was once a tax on a manumission, the price of one person's desperate bid for freedom. The traces remain silent, proof that Rome's grandeur was built not only on conquest but on bureaucracy. So you watch as the auctioneer lifts a titulus high, announcing the traits of the body before him. Buyers lean in, calculating. The bidding rises. A stylus scratches on wax. A clerk counts coins. The tax is paid. The receipt is sealed, and another life vanishes into Rome's ledgers. One more line in the endless, orderly record of human commerce. If Rome's slave markets were theaters of despair, then manumission was the whisper of possibility that flickered at the edges of bondage. To be enslaved in the empire was to live as property, your name written on receipts, your body reduced to an entry in a ledger. But Rome, pragmatic as ever, left a door half open. Through it came the idea that one might, under the right conditions, move from slave to freed person, from commodity to citizen, though never entirely equal. Freedom existed, but it was rationed, conditional, and always tangled with obligation. The path most often began with the peculiar. It sounds harmless, even quaint, a private fund, money set aside. But for a slave, a peculiarity was both a miracle and a trap. Masters, ever pragmatic, sometimes allowed their slaves to accumulate small sums, earnings from tips, gifts from kind patrons, scraps of profit from tasks performed. Officially, the money still belonged to the master, for a slave could not own property. Yet unofficially, it became the slave's lifeline. a shadow purse kept with quiet care. Every coin tucked away was not just bronze or silver, it was a possibility. With a peculiarity, a slave might one day negotiate freedom. A price would be said often the same as their market value, sometimes higher if the master was greedy. Slowly, painfully, over years or decades, the coins would pile up. Some masters encouraged it, seeing manumission as profit. Others dangled it like bait, using the dream of liberty to extract obedience. For the slave, the peculiarity was never guaranteed. It could be seized, spent, or denied at a whim, and yet it offered something otherwise unthinkable: hope. Manumission itself came in many forms. The most solemn was the ceremony before a magistrate. The master would lead the slave into a courtroom, declare his wish, and touch the slave with a ceremonial rod, the vindicta. Words were spoken, witnesses present, and with that gesture the slave became a freed person, no longer property but citizen in limited form. It was theater again, this time staged not in the market but in the halls of law. Rome cloaking cruelty in ritual once more. Another path came through a will. Masters often freed loyal slaves upon their death, declaring in testament that certain men or women should be released. For some, it was an act of gratitude. For others, it was piety. Rome valued generosity in death as a mark of honor. And for many, it was calculation, freeing slaves so that their heirs would not be burdened by dependents they did not want. But for the slave, manumission by will was bittersweet. Freedom came only when the master was cold in the ground, and until then, the promise was as fragile as parchment. Sometimes, manumission was casual, a declaration made without ceremony. A master might free a favored servant over dinner, or on a whim, or to reward loyalty. These informal freedoms carried risks, for without proper registration they could be contested. The freed person could find themselves dragged back into slavery if the paperwork was not in order. Rome's love of bureaucracy never slept, even in freedom. For those fortunate enough to be freed, life shifted, but did not transform. Freedmen Liberty stood in a peculiar half-world. They were no longer property, but neither were they equal to those born free. They could marry legally, own property, conduct business, and even become wealthy. Some rose to astonishing prominence, managing enterprises, running workshops, or serving in administrative posts. The imperial court itself teemed with freedmen, men who once stood in chains now guiding the empire's bureaucracy. Wealth and influence could be theirs, but not prestige. They could not hold the highest offices, nor claim the dignity of old Roman bloodlines. And always, they carried obligations to their former masters. Freedom was never severance, it was contract. A freedman owed loyalty, service, and often part of his earnings to his patron, the man who once owned him. In public, this bond was expected, praised even. Gratitude was not optional. To turn against your former master was to court scandal, disgrace, and sometimes violence. The chains might be gone, but the tether remained invisible, binding freedmen to the very households that once claimed their flesh. Yet many embraced the chance, for even tethered freedom was better than bondage. Freedmen built shops, managed fleets, crafted mosaics, and ran taverns. They formed guilds, passed wealth to children, and carved their names into tombs with pride. Their sons and daughters could rise further still, entering the ranks of freeborn citizens, erasing the shadow of slavery in a single generation. For many, this was the true miracle of manumission, not their own liberty, but the possibility of a different life for their descendants. Still, the process was fraught with irony. Rome, which enslaved millions, also celebrated freedmen as proof of its magnanimity. Statues honored them, inscriptions praised them, emperors relied on them. The system that crushed people also allowed a few to rise, and in doing so, it justified itself. See, Rome could say, we are merciful. We reward loyalty. We make citizens of our slaves. It was propaganda as much as policy, a way to dress conquest in the language of opportunity. For the slave scraping coins into a hidden purse, none of this mattered. What mattered was survival. A coin today meant bread tomorrow, but 100 coins might mean freedom in 10 years. The arithmetic of hope, was as brutal as the arithmetic of the market. And for every slave who saved enough, hundreds more never did. Their peculiarity seized, their promises broken, their hopes extinguished in the mud of endless labor. You picture the moment of freedom. A man stands before a magistrate, his master's hand upon his shoulder. Words are spoken. The rod touches his skin, and suddenly he is no longer property. He breathes differently. He walks differently. The air feels strange, without the weight of ownership pressing against his back. He is free, and yet not free, bound still by gratitude, obligation, expectation. But he carries papers now, proof of his altered status, and no one can sell him again. That alone is a miracle. Freedom in Rome was never equality. It was a compromise, a bargain struck between cruelty and mercy. But for those who achieved it, it was life itself. To walk the streets as a freedman was to walk as a survivor, a reminder that Rome's system could be bent, if only slightly, by persistence, loyalty, or luck. And so you imagine the freedman years later, sitting in his shop, children playing nearby, the memory of chains fading like a scar. He owes debts to his patron, yes. He bows when expected, yes. But his children are freeborn, and in them lies a future beyond his reach. That, perhaps, is the truest legacy of manumission. Not the freedom of one, but the hope of many. Rome thrived on slavery, but it also thrived on these small escapes, these carefully rationed freedoms. They kept hope alive just enough to prevent despair, loyalty alive just enough to prevent revolt. The empire was built on chains, but it was sustained by the promise that sometimes those chains could break. If Rome's slave markets thrived on categories, then among the most haunting were the children. For the empire, a child was not innocent, not potential, not a life to be nurtured. It was an investment. The small body standing on the auction block fetched a lower price than an adult, yes, but it carried the allure of pliability, of years of service to come. Where a man might be scarred by memory, a child could be molded. Where a woman might remember freedom, a child might never know it existed. That made them cheaper, and in many ways, more valuable. The numbers tell the story coldly. An unskilled adult slave might cost 1,500 or 2,000 sesterces. A child? As little as 500, sometimes 1,000, rarely more than 2,000, unless beauty or talent inflated the price. For the average Roman household, this made children accessible in a way adult slaves were not. The poor could not dream of owning a philosopher or a physician, but a boy to run errands, a girl to help in the kitchen that was within reach. And so, children became common currency in the empire's machinery of ownership. On the auction block, the sight was unbearable. Small figures, nervous, clutching at each other, eyes darting toward the crowd. They were displayed as plainly as adults, sometimes stripped, sometimes posed, the auctioneer pointing out nimble fingers, quick feet, youthful obedience. Buyers asked about age, health, and temperament as though they were purchasing puppies. The child's tears did not lower the price. They simply reminded the buyer that the investment was fresh, unspoiled, ready for shaping. Many of these children were not strangers to slavery. They were vernae, household-born slaves, born in the master's villa. They never knew another life. Their parents enslaved themselves, raised them under the watchful eyes of overseers. Their lullabies whispered with resignation. A child born in bondage belonged to the household as surely as a calf or a lamb. There was no paperwork to purchase them, no auctioneer's cry. They were absorbed into the estate from the moment of birth, tiny additions to the master's wealth. For aristocratic households, vernae were essential. They filled every crevice of domestic labor, carrying messages, sweeping floors, tending fires, fetching water. They scurried through villas, invisible but omnipresent, their small bodies navigating spaces adults could not. Masters prized them not only for their utility but for their loyalty, or what passed for loyalty when no alternative existed. A child raised in chains could not remember freedom. Their obedience was not rebellion suppressed but ignorance preserved. Training began early, and it was merciless. Boys were taught to wait silently, to anticipate commands, to fetch and carry without question. Girls were trained in spinning, weaving, cooking, and childcare. Some were set aside for more delicate tasks, waiting at the table, tending to clothing, running errands for mistresses. All learned quickly that silence was safety, obedience, and survival. A dropped cup, a clumsy mistake, a whispered word out of turn, each carried punishment. Not always brutal, but always humiliating enough to scare. Childhood became apprenticeship in servitude. Discipline drilled deeper with each passing year. For some, the exploitation was harsher still. Beauty in a child was dangerous, for it inflated value in ways that had little to do with labor. A pretty girl might be groomed for concubinage, her youth twisted into spectacle. A handsome boy might be set aside for entertainment, displayed as ornament in a wealthy household. Rome's appetite for luxury consumed innocence as readily as it consumed grain or wine. The line between servant and object blurred most cruelly in the lives of children, their worth reduced to appearance long before adulthood. Entertainment often pressed children into roles. They performed at banquets, singing or reciting, their voices trembling under the gaze of guests. They danced, clapped, played flutes, or tumbled in acrobatic displays. Their presence was meant to delight, but behind the performance was discipline, rehearsal, and the threat of punishment if they faltered. Guests applauded the master's refinement, never pausing to consider the child's fear. Even beyond villas, children were dispatched into the streets. They ran errands to markets, fetched water from fountains, and carried messages across neighborhoods. Their small size made them quick, their youth made them invisible. No one questioned the sight of a child hurrying barefoot through alleys with a basket balanced on thin arms. The city swallowed them whole, its chaos a background against which their servitude blurred into normality. Yet for all their labor, children remained precarious investments. Their value lay in future potential. But disease, accident, or malnutrition could claim them easily. Masters calculated risks. Buy young, pay less, but gamble on survival. Some grew into indispensable servants, loyal and skilled, their years of training paying dividend. Others died before adulthood, their low price justified by the fragility of their lives. Rome's cold arithmetic extended even here, reducing childhood to balance sheets of profit and loss. Among the Vernae, bonds sometimes formed that cut across the boundaries of power. A mistress might show fondness for a girl who dressed her daily. A master might trust a boy who carried his letters. These affections could soften treatment, occasionally even open the door to manumission later in life. But the affection was never equal. It was ownership disguised as fondness. The master's generosity always conditional. A child's loyalty could be rewarded, but it could never be free. And what of the parents? For enslaved mothers and fathers, the birth of a child brought no joy untainted. The infant was not theirs to claim. The laughter of toddlers in the courtyard was sweet, but it echoed with inevitability the knowledge that the child would one day scrub, fetch, serve, or worse. Some parents clung to their children desperately, teaching them survival skills, whispering warnings in the dark. Others withdrew, their grief too heavy to allow attachment. Slavery poisoned even love, turning parenthood into a wound that deepened with every command the child obeyed. Occasionally, manumission touched these children too. A beloved page freed at adolescence. A nursemaid released with gratitude after years of service. But for most, freedom was a dream deferred beyond imagining. They grew, they worked, they aged, their lives consumed by the machinery of Roman households. Their names rarely entered the record except as property passed in wills. Their childhoods remembered only in the fragments of inscriptions carved by grieving parents or nostalgic masters. In this, Rome's cruelty was doubled. To enslave an adult was to break a life already lived. To enslave a child was to shape life itself into servitude, to erase even the memory of freedom before it could take root. The child slave was not only labor, he or she was legacy, proof that slavery could perpetuate itself endlessly, generation after generation, household born and household bound. Picture a villa at dusk. The lamps are lit, the atrium gleams with polished marble. Guests recline on couches, sipping wine. And there, flitting through the space like shadows, are children. One pours water, another clears cups, another kneels to adjust a sandal. Their movements are quick, efficient, and unnoticed. They are everywhere and nowhere, the quiet scaffolding upon which aristocratic life rests. Their laughter, when it slips out, is hushed quickly. Their tears are invisible. Their childhood has been traded for service, and no one remarks upon it. Rome congratulated itself on civilization, on law, on culture, but its grandeur was sustained by these smallest bodies, trained from birth to carry burdens they did not choose. The empire's mosaics shimmered, its banquets dazzled, its politics thundered, all because children fetched, scrubbed, bowed, and obeyed. And when those children grew old, more would be born in bondage to replace them, a cycle as relentless as the tides. So when you imagine Rome, do not picture only senators in white togas or generals in triumphal chariots. Picture also the boy carrying a tray too heavy for his arms. Picture the girl wiping tears from her cheek as she spins wool under the eye of her mistress. Picture the parents watching, powerless, as their children are raised not as sons and daughters but as assets. This too was Rome, a world where even childhood could be priced, purchased, and consumed. If the Roman slave market was a theater, then value was its script. Every body brought to auction, every hand lifted in bid, every coin exchanged was guided by an elaborate calculus age. Health, origin, beauty, skill. The Romans prided themselves on order, and just as their engineers measured aqueducts and their generals measured supply lines, their buyers measured flesh. Nothing was left uncalculated. Humanity was appraised with the same meticulous eye they turned on marble or grain. Age was the first and most obvious factor. Children sold cheap, their future labor a gamble, their fragility a risk priced into every bid. Young adults, by contrast, commanded higher sums. A man or woman in the prime of life promised years of labor ahead, their muscles firm, their lungs clear, their obedience still malleable. These bodies fetched the steadiest prices, the backbone of Roman estates. The elderly, however, slipped into the category of burden. A gray-haired man or stooped woman sold for a pittance, sometimes included as unwanted add-ons in bulk purchases. Their bodies, once valuable, were now liabilities, mouths to feed, limbs too weak to justify the cost. Age was currency, and its exchange rate fell swiftly. Health shaped value even more cruelly. On the block, buyers inspected teeth, skin, and gait with a detachment of butchers. A scar from war might lower the price, unless it hinted at strength. A limp, a clouded eye, a cough each sliced coins from the total. Rome demanded utility, and a body that could not promise steady labor was a body discounted. Even so, the discounts found their uses. Mines, mills, brothels, places where survival was brief and cost-effectiveness mattered more than longevity. Rome wasted nothing, not even the fragile. Appearance, though, could overturn even age and health. Beauty was currency of its own. Pale skin, symmetrical features, tall stature, all added premiums to the price. A beautiful girl might fetch more than a strong laborer, a handsome boy more than an experienced artisan. Buyers leaned close, calculating not only work, but prestige. To display beauty in your household was to display wealth itself. For women, beauty often meant concubinage or performance. For men, it meant positions as attendants, entertainers, or companions. Rome commodified allure as ruthlessly as it commodified strength. Origin played into value in ways both practical and prejudiced. Greeks were prized above many others. Their culture carried prestige, their language the mark of refinement. A Greek slave might cost twice what a Gaul could, even if their skills matched, simply because Greekness itself was a luxury. To boast of a Greek tutor or secretary was to declare one's household cultivated. Syrians, too, were valued for craft and sophistication, while Thracians and Gauls were often funneled into rough labor or gladiatorial schools, their bodies viewed as instruments of brute strength rather than intellect. North Africans, Spaniards, Jews, Britons, all were slotted into stereotypes, their prices reflecting Roman prejudices as much as their real abilities. Skills, of course, could skyrocket value beyond all else. A literate slave commanded sums far above the ordinary, for literacy was rare and precious. A doctor, musician, or philosopher might cost 10 or 20 times the price of a laborer. These individuals were not merely workers. They were living trophies. Their purchase announced refinement. Their presence displayed dominance. The more unique the skill, the higher the price. A physician versed in herbs from the East, a musician trained in exotic instruments, a scribe fluent in multiple languages, all fetched astronomical figures, each bid a contest of wealth among Rome's elite. Specialization fractured the market further. Household slaves, cooks, cleaners, attendants were the most common. Their prices steady but unspectacular. Education, slaves, tutors, scribes, philosophers were rarer, their prices spiking with demand among aristocrats eager to display sophistication. Entertainment slaves, actors, singers, dancers varied wildly in cost, their worth tied to novelty and talent. Concubines, valued for beauty, fetched high sums in private sales, their lives twisted into ornamentation. Gladiators stood apart entirely, dangerous, costly, but potentially lucrative. Their bodies were investments in spectacle, their price justified by the possibility of fame and profit in the arena. Rome's categories were exhaustive, every role calculated, every price tailored. Gender carved the market with its own sharp edge. Men were valued for labor, strength, and specialized skills. They dug fields, carried loads, fought in arenas, managed estates. Their bodies were instruments of work, their prices measured by potential yield. Women, by contrast, were valued for domesticity and sexuality. They spun, cooked, cleaned, nursed children, and they entertained, served, and submitted. A beautiful woman fetched far more than a strong one. Her value measured less in labor and more in allure. Gender dictated destiny, and the marketplace reflected it with ruthless precision. The auctioneer's voice made these valuations explicit. Greek tutor, educated, literate, prime age. The bids surged high. Thracian laborer, strong back, scared but able. The price steadied lower. Young girl, 14, beautiful complexion. The crowd leaned forward, eyes narrowing, coins clinking. Each announcement carried coded signals, each price reflecting the layers of Roman prejudice and desire. Even trauma entered the calculus. War captives were cheap in times of conquest, their abundance flooding markets and dragging down prices. Yet trauma made them risky, resentful, rebellious, dangerous. Buyers weighed cost against control, sometimes preferring the higher-priced vernet, household-born slaves who had never known freedom and so carried no memory of rebellion. Value was never static. It shifted with supply, demand, and fear. The market's cold arithmetic extended into every corner of Roman life. Estates balanced budgets around the purchase of laborers. Merchants calculated profits from reselling captives. Aristocrats measured prestige by the number of educated or beautiful slaves they owned. Even funerary inscriptions of freedmen sometimes recorded the sums once paid for them, as though price itself was identity. Rome's obsession with value did not stop at walls or fields. It penetrated into the human body, carving worth into every limb and feature. And yet, beneath the numbers, humanity persisted. The Greek tutor teaching Latin boys remembered a homeland that once revered him. The Thracian laborer breaking stones dreamed of forests far away. The young girl displayed beauty wept silently when the crowd dispersed. The numbers shouted in marketplaces could never extinguish the quiet truth of what they represented. Lives measured, categorized, and reduced. Rome's greatness was not only marble and conquest. It was this relentless commodification. To understand the empire, you must understand its arithmetic of flesh. Age, health, origin, beauty, skill, gender, all reduced to prices, shouted, recorded, and taxed. And so you watch again as the auctioneer lifts a hand, announcing value with practiced authority. The bids rise, the hammer falls, the receipt is written. A life is priced, purchased, and folded into the empire's machinery. The numbers live on in ledgers, long after the person has vanished. If the Roman world measured bodies by price, then nowhere did those numbers swell higher or heavier than in the blood-soaked theaters of spectacle. The slave market had its share of hierarchies, laborers cheap, children cheaper, philosophers costly, but gladiators stood apart as creatures of paradox. They were slaves, yet prized like champions. They were property, yet worshipped like stars. They were investments in flesh and blood, instruments of both profit and prestige. To own one was to gamble not just on life, but on death itself. The cost reflected the risk. A common field hand might fetch 1,500 sesterces, but a trained gladiator could command 10 times that, sometimes more. It was a strange arithmetic. The stronger the body, the more spectacular the death it promised. To purchase a gladiator was to purchase the possibility of profit through victory and of entertainment through slaughter. Each bid was not just for labor but for drama, for the crowd's roar, for the chance to bask in reflected glory as your branded man carved a legend into sand. Training was central to the value. Raw captives, Gauls, Thracians, Dacians might be purchased cheaply and sent to the ludi, the gladiator schools where discipline turned wild men into weapons. There they learned the dance of combat, the measured stride, the precise strike, the calculated pause to let the crowd gasp. The harsh regimen broke many, but those who survived emerged honed, their market value multiplied. A man who entered a school worth 1,000 sesterces might emerge worth 15,000. His scars testimony not to weakness, but to experience. The schools themselves were part prison, part academy. Men slept in cells, ate meager rations, and drilled endlessly. But they also received medical care, better food than field slaves, and even the chance at fame. The paradox deepened. A gladiator's life was brutal, but not anonymous. Unlike the faceless laborers digging ditches, he was seen, cheered, sometimes adored. His name echoed in taverns, scratched into walls by admirers, whispered by women who dreamed of his strength. This visibility inflated his price, transforming him from property into celebrity commodity. Female gladiators, gladiatrices, added another layer of spectacle. Rare, exotic, shocking to Roman sensibilities, they were paraded as novelties. Their value soared not because they fought often, but because their appearance in the arena was itself an event. Audiences gasped at the sight of women wielding swords, their bodies both eroticized and brutalized. To own or sponsor a gladiatrix was to flaunt wealth and audacity, to prove you could command not only the common forms of entertainment, but its rarest, riskiest variations. Their prices rivaled those of skilled male fighters. Though their careers were often shorter, their bodies consumed quickly by the crowd's insatiable appetite for novelty. The economics of gladiators were not only about purchase but about return. A victorious fighter brought honor and profit to his owner. Wagers poured in, gifts from admirers flowed, invitations to banquets and alliances followed. The gladiator was both advertisement and investment, each victory increasing his value, each defeat risking its collapse. Owners calculated carefully. Too many fights, and the man might die. Too few, and he might lose his edge. Balance was everything. Profit extracted not from a single spectacle, but from a career measured in blood and cheers. Appearance shaped value as much as skill. Tall men, muscular frames, striking features, these qualities inflated price because they amplified spectacle. A handsome gladiator drew admirers as readily as he drew swords. Crowds adored beauty almost as much as brutality, and Rome's appetite for entertainment demanded both. Owners knew this, parading their fighters with care, ensuring hair was groomed, bodies oiled, scars displayed like badges of honor. In a society where even philosophers were commodities, gladiators became the most visible proof that flesh could be sculpted into currency. Some gladiators became so famous their names alone commanded bids. Mirmillo, Retiarius, secutor fighters with styles as recognizable as brands. Graffiti in Pompeii records their victories, their fan clubs, their desirability. Women swooned over them, sometimes leaving messages declaring themselves pierced by the spear of Celadus the Thracian, or smitten by Crescens the net fighter. To own such a man was to own not only a fighter but a phenomenon, his body a walking advertisement for wealth and prestige. But the risk never disappeared. A single unlucky strike could end an investment worth tens of thousands of sesterces. Owners wept not for the man, but for the loss of capital, the collapse of profit, the silencing of cheers. Insurance of a kind existed. Sometimes contracts guaranteed a payout if a gladiator died too soon, but no parchment could erase the fragility of flesh. Every match was a roll of dice, every cheer a reminder that beneath the spectacle lay ruin waiting in the sand. The paradox of status deepened further. Gladiators were slaves, yet they commanded awe. They were owned, yet they held a kind of power over crowds, over admirers, even sometimes over their masters, who relied on their victories for prestige. They lived on the edge of disgrace and glory, despised as lowly yet celebrated as heroes. This tension inflated their price and their danger alike. A rebellious field hand might spark a minor disturbance. A rebellious gladiator could spark a war. Spartacus was the ultimate proof. His revolt a scar that haunted every marketplace where a fighter's price was calculated. High-status slaves were not limited to the arena. Beyond gladiators, Rome prized those whose proximity to power or beauty inflated their value. Eunuchs in palaces, concubines in villas, scribes in the imperial bureaucracy, all were expensive because they were symbols. To own one was to declare rank, to display dominance. But gladiators stood apart in their volatility. They were the only slaves who could, in moments of triumph, seem almost free, their swords carving temporary power from the stage of death. Imagine the auction. A man steps forward, scars across his chest, muscles honed, his name already known from past victories. The crowd murmurs, the auctioneer shouts, the bids climb swiftly. 15,000, 20, 30, coins change hands, contracts signed, ownership transferred. The man himself bows, silent, his fate bound to new masters. He is property, yet he is also a legend. His value lies not only in the blows he strikes, but in the gasps he provokes, in the gossip he inspires, in the wagers he generates. Rome's hunger for spectacle sustains his worth, and his worth sustains the empire's cruelty. And so you leave the marketplace, ears ringing with bids, eyes haunted by scars. You understand now that Rome did not merely buy labor. It brought drama, prestige, and illusion. In gladiators, it found the most dangerous commodity of all. Slaves who, in the moment of combat, seemed almost gods. Their value was measured not only in sesterces, but in screams, in sweat, in the shifting tide of a crowd's adoration. They were high-cost, high-risk, high-glory investments, and their blood watered the roots of the empire. In the end, the story of Rome is not only one of marble arches and thunderous legions. It is not only the triumphal marches of generals or the fiery debates of senators. Beneath the grandeur, quieter but heavier, lies the hum of chains. The empire's heartbeat was not measured in speeches or monuments, but in the cries of men, women, and children bought and sold, their lives reduced to columns of numbers scratched into wax. Slavery was not an accident of Roman life. It was its foundation. Every villa that glittered with mosaics, every feast that overflowed with wine, every aqueduct that carried water into bustling cities was fed by slave labor. The empire's bureaucracy wrapped this cruelty in order, turning the sale of people into paperwork, receipts, and taxes. Nothing escaped the empire's need for control, not even despair. The markets showcased Rome's casual brutality. Bodies displayed like amphorae, children priced like calves, philosophers auctioned like rare curiosities. Buyers poked and prodded, sellers oiled and dyed. Auctioneers shouted defects and virtues with equal relish. It was a theater of possession, a public ritual reminding everyone who ruled and who was ruled. Yet behind every receipt was a person fearful, trembling, silent, and behind every price was a story that Rome would not write down. The calculus of value spreads through every corner of life. A child sold for 500 sesterces, a laborer for 2,000, a philosopher for 20,000. A concubine fetched more if her beauty pleased. A gladiator soared in worth if his victories drew crowds. The numbers fluctuated with wars, with fashion, with prejudice. Greeks were worth more, Thracians destined for the arena, Syrians for crafts, Africans for fields. Rome's prejudices became currency, its stereotypes etched into ledgers as though they were laws of nature. And yet, within this cruelty, Rome congratulated itself on mercy. Manumission dangled as promise. The peculiarity offered as hope. Slaves could dream of buying freedom, of standing before a magistrate, and being touched with the rod of liberty. Freedmen built shops, raised families, climbed into the ranks of citizens. Rome pointed to them as proof of generosity, even as millions remained in bondage. Freedom existed, but always on Rome's terms, always at Rome's profit. The paradoxes piled high: gladiators, enslaved yet adored, despised as lowly yet worshipped as heroes; eunuchs, mutilated yet trusted in the inner chambers of power; philosophers, once voices of reason, reduced to ornaments of prestige; children, born into servitude, trained before they could understand obedience. Each category of slave revealed a different face of Rome: brutal, pragmatic, vain, efficient. Together, they formed the true portrait of an empire that claimed to civilize the world while treating people as commodities. What Rome left behind, its laws, its architecture, its literature, still fascinates. But what it erased, the names of millions of enslaved, the laughter of children turned into labor, the dreams of men who once held swords in freedom haunts. For every triumphal arch, there is a field plowed by bound hands. For every marble bath, a child hauls water. For every epic poem, a scribe copying lines he could not claim. Perhaps the most chilling truth is not the brutality itself, but the casualness of it. Romans did not see slavery as a contradiction. It was ordinary, expected, woven into the fabric of daily life. To question it was to question Rome itself, and few dared. The empire sustained itself not only by swords, but by silence, by the normalization of cruelty so deep that it became invisible to those who benefited. And yet the silence was never complete. Whispers of rebellion flickered in fields and mines. Spartacus rose and fell, but his shadow lingered, a reminder that the enslaved were never fully broken. Freedmen inscribed their names on tombs, proud of liberty won. Mothers wept openly when children were sold, their grief defying the cold mathematics of the auctioneer. Humanity persisted, fragile but unextinguished, even in the heart of Rome's machinery. So when you picture the empire, do not imagine only marble and glory. Imagine the marketplace, crowded and loud, with auctioneers shouting prices into the air. Imagine the receipts, the wax tablets recording not amphorae of oil, but the sale of a boy or a girl. Imagine the villas glittering with mosaics, supported by the labor of those whose names were never carved into stone. Imagine the amphitheater, roaring with cheers, as gladiators' slaves all bled into sand for profit and spectacle. Rome's legacy is complex, but its grandeur was never free. It was bought, again and again, at the price of human lives. Its statues stand because backs are bent. Its aqueducts endure because hands toiled. Its culture flourished because others' cultures were enslaved and consumed. Beneath the arches, beneath the inscriptions, beneath the legends, there is always the sound of the market, the rustle of chains, the murmur of coins. And perhaps the final reflection is this: the empire did not endure forever. The markets fell silent, the receipts crumbled, the taxes ceased. But the memory of those lives, though rarely recorded, lingers in the questions we still ask. What was it like to stand on the block, to hear your price shouted, to see strangers debate your worth? What did it feel like to save coins in a hidden pouch, hoping for freedom that might never come? What did it mean to live as a gladiator, cheered by crowds yet owned by another? These questions hang in the air, unanswered, yet heavy. Rome was many things: magnificent, ambitious, cruel, enduring. But above all, it was a civilization built on slavery, and no amount of marble can erase the cost. To remember that is not to diminish its history, but to honor those who carried it, silently, invisibly, beneath the weight of chains.